Amat merat tesol derat merut.
Hey all, Dave here. Recently, Godless Granny was kind enough to invite me onto her channel, so I just wanted to say thank you to her here at the start of this video. I'm always honored and very grateful for these kinds of opportunities. If you haven't checked out Godless Granny yet, and aren't subscribed to her, then you're missing out on a great channel and a great YouTuber. This video isn't directly related to the discussion Gigi and I had, but is instead related to discussion in the comment section, or related to a discussion in particular that I had in the comment section at least. During the discussion with Gigi, the idea of objective morality was brought up, and someone in the comment section brought that bit up. However, it isn't objective morality that we'll be discussing here. Instead, it's related to a discussion I had with someone under that comment. That discussion was about the idea of objectivity and subjectivity. The original question was about how we could have objective morality if objective is defined as independent of mind, emotion, or prejudice. We then began a discussion about the idea of objectivity and subjectivity. There are lots of common misconceptions about these ideas among atheists and skeptics, some of them highlighted in the discussion I had with the person in question. I'm not saying here that I disliked the conversation, as it was quite the opposite. It was a very enjoyable and interesting conversation. It's just that I saw many of the same misconceptions about what it means for something to be objective and subjective show up from this person that I have from many other atheists and skeptics. So let's discuss these ideas a little bit, beginning with the terms themselves. As you saw, the person I was in discussion with defined objective as independent of a mind and uninfluenced by emotion or prejudice. Both of these are relatively accurate definitions of objective, though let's not depend on my word and instead have a look at a few dictionaries. The first dictionary we'll take a look at is the Free Dictionary, which should be appearing somewhere on the screen about now. As can be seen, the first definition it offers us is existing independent of or external to the mind, actual or real, and based on observable phenomena, empirical. The next definition it offers us is uninfluenced by emotions or personal prejudice. So both of these match the definitions the person I was in discussion with gave me. Let's take a look at the Collins Dictionary next, which should be appearing on screen right about now. This one misses out the existing independent of a mind definition, but that is a pretty standard definition, and a definition that's commonly used among atheists and skeptics. The other definitions include information based on facts, and someone basing their opinions on facts rather than personal feeling. The next dictionary we'll take a look at is the Cambridge Dictionary, which should be appearing on screen about now. As you can see, this is a pretty thorough entry in the dictionary, so let's just zoom in on a few definitions in the entry. This one here, and this one here, and this one here. The first one defines objective as based on real facts and not influenced by personal beliefs or feelings. The second one defines objective as not influenced by personal beliefs or feelings, fair or real. And finally, the third one defines objective as not influenced by personal beliefs or feelings. Finally, let's take a look at the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, which, like the others, should be appearing on screen about now. As with the Cambridge entry, you can see it's another large entry. So once again, we'll zoom in on a few of them. The first definition listed is expressing or dealing with facts or conditions as perceived without distortion by personal feelings, prejudices, or interpretations. The second here lists of, relating to, or being an object, phenomenon, or condition in the realm of sensible experience independent of individual thought and perceptible by all observers, having reality independent of the mind, and involving or deriving from sense perception or experience with actual conditions or phenomena. This entry resembles both definitions of the words used so far. One is related to objects that exist independent to mind, and one about being uninfluenced by personal feelings or prejudice. From these various entries in various dictionaries, we can derive the term objective can be used in a few different ways, including some not covered here, though we can ignore those other uses because they are not relevant to this particular discussion. The uses we're interested in discuss something being objective if it is independent of the mind, or if it is based on facts and not based on our emotions, beliefs, prejudices, or preferences. A simpler way to put this, and one that covers both of these definitions, is something is objective if it is stance independent. What do I mean by this? Well, things that are independent of our mind do not rely on our stance about them. The moon does not rely on my beliefs about it to exist. The things the moon is made of do not depend on my beliefs about them either. My belief that the moon does not exist in no way alters the existence of the moon, and my belief that the moon is made of green cheese in no way makes the moon made of green cheese. And the same is true for facts. That World War II took place between 1939 and 1945 in no way depends on what you or I believe or prefer or our feelings about the years in which World War II took place. Facts are independent of our individual stances on them, so we could say that all ideas about what it means for something to be objective are covered by the idea of them being stance independent. Of course, there is more that could be said about those things, and about what makes these facts obtain. If you want to give me a critique based on these ideas, or just generally discuss them, then feel free to hit me up in the comments. I'd be more than happy to listen to them and discuss them. This video is about the idea of objectivity and subjectivity though, so to keep the runtime down, I'll focus on those ideas instead. Next up, let's take a look at the definitions of subjective. For consistency, we'll use the same dictionaries here when looking at the definition of subjective. We'll begin with the Cambridge Dictionary, whose entry should be on screen about now. This is a nice short one, with the definition listed being influenced or based on personal beliefs or feelings rather than based on facts. Next up, we have the Collins Dictionary, whose entry should be on screen about now. According to the Collins Dictionary, subjective is defined as based on personal opinions or feelings rather than facts, which is pretty much exactly what the Cambridge lists it as. Next up is the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. As you can see on screen now, the entry for Merriam-Webster is a slightly larger one. So let's zoom in and focus on the most important ones for this discussion. The first two definitions given are a characteristic of or belonging to reality as perceived rather than independent of a mind, and also relating to or being experience or knowledge as conditioned by personal mental characteristics or states. In more simpler terms, these definitions are akin to the more commonly expressed coming from a mind that we often see atheists and skeptics using. The next set of definitions in the entry are peculiar to a particular individual and modified or affected by personal views, experience, or background. To put these in more simpler terms, this means being based on personal preferences, beliefs, and stances, rather than being based on facts, similar to the definitions listed in Cambridge and Collins. And finally, in Merriam-Webster's entry, we have the definitions arising from conditions within the brain or sense organs and not directly caused by external stimuli, and arising out of or identified by means of one's perception of one's own states and processes. In other words, our feelings of pain, sadness, joy, and our awareness of them, or our imaginations or hallucinations. Meaning that the Merriam-Webster entry includes the popular from a mind definition that we see from atheists and skeptics, and based on personal opinions, beliefs, and preferences rather than facts that we see in the other dictionary entries. Last up, we have the entry in the Free Dictionary. You know the drill. There are two definitions here that we're interested in. The first is dependent on taking place in a person's mind rather than the external world, and based on a given person's experience experience, understanding, and feelings, personal or individual. These two definitions match the other definitions already given and match the common definitions often given by skeptics and atheists. They match the more commonly given from a mind and based on beliefs or preferences. Just as I simplified the definition of objective to stance independent, I'm going to simplify subjective to stance dependent. Anything that exists only in our mind and can only be accessed by our own experiences is something that is dependent on our stance or viewpoint. Our emotional states, our preferences, our imaginations, our beliefs, and those kind of things depend on our reports about them. They are only accessed by us and they depend on our stance, as do our judgments about things like favorite foods, the beauty of a painting, the value of certain things, and that kind of thing. Of course, like with the things I mentioned with the term objective, some of these are a little more complicated. And as with the term objective, if you want to critique what I say here or want to object to how I'm portraying this, feel free to leave a comment. I'm more than happy to respond to or discuss these things. For now though, let's move on. These definitions lead us to the very first common error that I see other atheists and skeptics make when it comes to the idea of what it means for something to be objective or subjective. A lot of skeptics and atheists only adhere to the from a mind and independent of a mind definitions of subjective and objective, and they ignore the other applications of the word. One common way I have heard objective and subjective described is that if all the minds that existed were to suddenly disappear, everything that is left over is what would be objective. All of the things above that are what are considered subjective. This makes sense when applying the from a mind and independent of a mind applications. After all of the objects left over after all minds disappeared would be independent of a mind. However, like I say, this excludes the other definitions mentioned earlier in the video. Consider this definition here: expressing or dealing with facts as perceived without distortion by personal feelings, prejudices, or interpretation. Perception is something that relies on the existence of a mind. As described by the Cambridge Dictionary here, perception is a belief or opinion held by many people and based on how things seen, or the quality of being aware of things through the physical senses, especially sight. Meaning that perception is something that relies on the existence of a mind, making the term objective in this sense something that is subjective in nature according to the definitions that they use. What about this definition also? Based on real facts and not influenced by personal beliefs or feelings. Many I have discussed this with argue for the existence of objective and subjective facts, with objective facts referring to all the things that exist independent of a mind, and subjective facts referring to all the things that exist because of a mind. So the moon and the sun are objective facts. The Prime Minister of the UK and the President of the US are subjective facts, at least according to the definitions independent of a mind and from a mind, and according to the many skeptics and atheists I've had discussion with, including the person I was in discussion with in Gigi's comment section. But what is a fact? Philosophically speaking, there is a lot of information when it comes to theories about facts. What they are, what makes them facts, how they can be known, and that kind of thing. As can be seen from this snippet from the SCP entry on facts, it's a pretty complicated matter when we get deep into what facts are and how they work. If we zoom in here though, we can see the basic ideas expressed in a very simple manner. The first description of a fact is simply a true truth bearer. What is a truth bearer? A truth bearer is essentially a proposition. It is a truth-apt declarative statement that asserts some state of affairs about reality. A few examples of this are Rishi Sunak is the current Prime Minister of the UK, World War II happened between the years of 1939 and 1945, and Boris Johnson is the current Prime Minister of the UK. All three of these statements are truth bearers, but only two of them would be considered facts. facts. This is because only two of those three statements are true truth bearers. So, a fact is simply a truth-apt declarative statement about some state of affairs in reality. This sort of matches the definition of fact given here in the Cambridge Dictionary, which lists a fact as something that is known to have happened or to exist, especially something for which proof exists or about which there is information. Facts have an element of being information. Rishi Sunak is the current Prime Minister of the UK is a fact because we know the Prime Minister of the UK exists, and that this position is currently held by Rishi Sunak. At least at the time of me scripting and making this video anyway. We have proof and information about this, so this statement is a fact. There's a few things to note here though. The first thing to note is that according to many skeptics and atheists, those facts would all be considered subjective facts, as those facts are something that only exist due to the existence of a mind. If all the minds in the world were to suddenly disappear, there would be no prime ministers and no knowledge of World War II. These ideas and these facts rely on a mind, so according to the skeptics and atheists, they are subjective facts. However, according to the definition here, something is objective if it is based on facts. As previously stated, Rishi Sunak is the current Prime Minister of the UK just is a fact. It is a true declarative statement. We have information that Rishi Sunak is the current Prime Minister of the UK, and there is empirical evidence that Rishi Sunak is the current Prime Minister of the UK, and more. So, if something is objective if it is based on fact, and it is a fact that Rishi Sunak is the current Prime Minister of the UK, then the statement Rishi Sunak is the current Prime Minister of the UK is an objectively true statement. We'll come back to this shortly, but for now, let's move on to what many skeptics and atheists call objective facts. According to these skeptics and atheists, including the person I was in discussion with, objective facts are facts about all the things that exist independent of our mind. So the moon and the sun are an objective fact. A cat is an objective fact. The words used to describe them would obviously be considered subjective because words come from a mind, but the facts themselves are objective because they describe things that exist outside of our mind. There is a bit of a problem here though, at least as far as I can see. The problem is that there can be no such thing as an objective fact according to these definitions. How so? Well, if facts are declarative statements and information, then they all come from a mind. If all minds were to suddenly disappear, then so would facts. Facts are not something that exist independently of minds, and so therefore all facts are subjective. At least according to the definitions used by the skeptics and atheists. There can be subjective facts about objective things, but there can be no objective facts. At least if those skeptics and atheists are being consistent with the application of their definitions anyway. There is one way that facts can be objective though. I mentioned previously about defining objective as being stance independent and subjective being stance dependent. As we saw earlier, these definitions even match the definitions given in the dictionary cited at the beginning of the video. Let's consider the idea of Rishi Sunak as the current Prime Minister of the UK again, before moving on to a few other examples. The date today is the 14th of August 2023. That's the date that I'm currently working on this part of the video. This image here is the search result for the current Prime Minister of the UK that I did just a few seconds ago. So the statement that Rishi Sunak is the current Prime Minister of the UK is a true truth bearer. There is information that the statement is true, the Prime Minister of the UK is something that exists, and there is proof that Rishi Sunak is the Prime Minister currently. This fits the bill of it being a fact. As the statement is based on fact, it also fits the bill of being objective in the manner shown here. I could disagree with the statement and argue instead that Boris Johnson is the current Prime Minister of the UK, but that would just make me wrong. My opinion that Boris Johnson is the current Prime Minister of the UK does not change the fact that Rishi Sunak is the current Prime Minister. It wouldn't matter if I preferred Boris Johnson as the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister would still be Rishi Sunak, meaning that it does not fit the bill of being subjective in the sense of information being stance dependent, or the fact getting its truth from my belief, preference, or stance about who the current PM of the UK is. It is an objective matter rather than a subjective matter. Even if all the minds were to disappear tomorrow, it would still be a fact right now that Rishi Sunak is the current Prime Minister of the UK. Even if a mind needs to exist in order to understand what a Prime Minister of the UK is, it doesn't change that it is a stance-independent fact. Many atheists and skeptics will argue here that the current Prime Minister was chosen by a mind and was also chosen by people's preferences. So therefore, who the current PM is still fits the bill of being subjective. Yet, it is no single person's preference who the Prime Minister is that put the Prime Minister in power. There was a vote held, and that vote relied on people who both wanted him in power and wanted other people in power. The preferences of those who did not want him in power made absolutely no difference to him gaining power. It was other facts, such as gaining more votes, that put him in power. Meaning the fact that it was minds and preferences that were used to vote does not make it a subjective matter. Even if we were to accept, for the sake of argument, that him gaining power was all done subjectively, it would still be an objective matter that he is the current Prime Minister. Let's look at this through the lens of another example: speed limits. We all know what speed limits are. They are limits assigned by ruling bodies such as a highways department to certain roads. The one currently outside my house is 30 miles per hour. On the main road, it is 40 miles per hour and will be reduced to 30 miles per hour soon. These are all speed limits set by minds. One could even argue that they began as views, values, and preferences decided by a committee. They are even prone to change based on new views, values, and preferences decided by a committee. So one could argue that the speed limits fit the bill of being subjective in both senses of the words that I mentioned previously in the video. Not only could someone, but I have had skeptics and atheists argue this with me. However, just as with voting for the leader of a country, your preferences, values, beliefs, or stance will not alter what that speed limit is. You may be able to set up a campaign or protest and push for the changing of the speed limit on a certain road, but the current speed limit of said road is not influenced in any way by your stance on it. If you were to go over the speed limit of that road, it would be a fact that you have gone over the speed limit on that road. Regardless of whether a cop catches you doing it, if it is illegal to break the speed limit, then you have broken the law. If you were caught and brought to court and you told the court that as far as you were concerned, the speed limit on that road is 60 miles per hour, it would make no difference to what that speed limit is. You would still be fined for breaking the speed limit or whatever punishment is due according to the court. The judge may allow for special circumstances and may make some other judgment about your case, but even that wouldn't affect the speed limit. It would just affect how you were treated for going over the speed limit. So, even if the speed limit was decided by minds and was originally based on some person or committee's preferences or beliefs, it is not decided by yours. For all intents and purposes, the speed limit is an objective matter as far as your stance is concerned. Once codified into law, it is even objective to those who may have originally decided it. The speed limit will be 30 miles per hour for them, just as it is for you. As can be seen, the idea of subjectivity and objectivity is a complicated one. It does not depend on a simple matter such as from a mind or independent of a mind. Such a simple definition does not fit many of the cases in which we use these terms and how the terms are generally used. I'll wrap this up shortly, I promise. First though, I just want to speak quickly about one more thing, a thing that exists in the mind but whose facts are fixed. I want to quickly speak about maths. Now, I know mathematical Platonism realism exists as a stance. However, I've not come across many atheists and skeptics who hold to this view of subjective and objective, and also hold to mathematical realism. Or if I have, I don't remember the encounter, and my apologies to anyone who I have forgotten. All the people I remember have argued that numbers and maths is something that exists only in the mind and are completely subjective. This section is for those people. One thing I hear from those who argue this form of objective and subjective is that objective facts don't change, only subjective facts can change. When we consider something like the position of a planet in orbit around the sun though, or even the current weather here on Earth, it becomes obvious that even according to this definition of objective and how they define objective facts can change. Even according to this definition, where objective is defined as being in accordance with facts, objective facts can change. The speed limit of the main road where I live is dropping from 40 miles per hour to 30 miles per hour in September, but it will remain a fact that it is 40 miles per hour until then. Let's stick with the idea that objective facts can change for a moment though. According to these definitions, the expression 1 + 1 = 2 is a subjective fact. It exists in the mind, as I just stated. Yet the expression 1 + 1 = 2 cannot change. It's a necessary truth, meaning that it would be true in any possible world. It would be true even if there was no mind around to express it. So it seems in the case of 1 + 1 = 2, we have a subjective fact that cannot change and cannot be changed, meaning that it fits the bill of what they define as an objective fact. If objective facts are facts that cannot change, then this qualifies as an objective fact. But an objective fact that is subjective, according to the definition of subjective that those same atheists use. It also fits this definition of objective, in that it is based on facts, and it does not rely on our opinion, belief, or preference for it to be true. It is true independent of our stance on it, showing us again that the idea of something being subjective or objective is far more complicated than the ideas that are floated around by many atheists and skeptics, and the ideas that are popular in many online spaces like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and the like. Like I said earlier in the video, this is a more complex topic than many seem to think. It's definitely more complex than simply saying subjective things are from a mind and objective things are external to a mind. The terms objective and subjective have multiple meanings and exist in multiple contexts. How the term is used and what it means depends on the context and the perspective of the agent and the relation between the observer and the observed. As can be seen, it isn't even just some specialist element of philosophy or epistemology or phenomenology or psychology that these versions of subjective and objective are being used. These are pretty standard dictionary definitions. I've been meaning to make this video for a while now, but my recent discussion in the comment section under Godless Granny's video inspired me to get it done. This video hasn't covered everything in the conversation, of course, but it's covered the basic ideas of objective and subjective, and covered some of the more common misunderstandings that I've seen, as well as tried to explain how objectivity works and what it is, hopefully in a relatable way. Though I would imagine that even this explanation won't be enough to convince many of those using the terms this way that they hold a misunderstanding of what it means for something to be objective and subjective. There are many who hold this misunderstanding because it is simply the most common explanation of subjectivity and objectivity that I see among atheists and skeptics. However, I get the feeling that for some it is more than that. There is purpose and reason behind holding to these definitions and these definitions only, or for arguing that anything that comes from a mind must be subjective. The conversation under Gigi's video started because of a criticism about how they couldn't see how morality could be objective as it's not something that is independent of a mind and can never be free from belief preferences or opinions. However, the argument was also made that speed limits cannot be objective, and the scientific method cannot be objective, and that what we know about the moon cannot be objective. It becomes clear that many are arguing from a complete misunderstanding of these ideas. And sometimes it also becomes clear that they are arguing using the terms in this way in order to block out certain theistic positions. To some extent, I blame the arguments that objective moral duties existing means that God must exist. This leads many to use the terms and define the ideas in such a way that the moral argument can never be true. They throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. They are willing to give up on the idea of objectivity of facts like World War II and prime ministers and presidents and the objectivity of mass, all to make sure that they can dispute the moral argument simply. All I really have to say is that there really is no need for that. As atheists and skeptics, we can accept the idea of objectivity that relies on the mind and the objectivity of speed limits and prime ministers and presidents in World War II without having to give ground to the moral argument or any other theistic argument. Accepting that objectivity exists as stance independent positions does not mean that those skeptics and atheists have to accept that objective morality exists in any form. It would make subjective morality even easier to argue for if they so desired, just as it would make many other things easier to argue for if they accepted that objectivity about mind-dependent things can and does exist. Anyway, that's enough of a rant from me now. Apologies for the long video, but it's a big subject and Brandolini's law plays some part here, especially with how well entrenched these ideas are in online atheism and skepticism. If you want to discuss any of the things or explain how I don't understand objectivity and subjectivity or critique what I say here, feel free to leave me a comment. Thank you to Rev and Fidel for being a Patreon and for all the help and constructive criticism you give me. I really do appreciate it. I'll see you all soon, and until next time, I hope life treats you well. Take care. Bye.